The stars looked peaceful that morning. Captain Dong Ho stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the distant sun of the Kepler 442 system. His crew was busy checking rocks and empty planets for useful metals. They had done this work many times before. It was quiet, safe work that helped humanity build new homes among the stars. Dong Ho liked these calm days. Humans had spread to 12 different star systems over the past 200 years. Each new world meant hope for the future. Each new discovery brought them closer to understanding their place in the galaxy. His ship, the Sejong's Dream, was not built for war. It carried scientists and miners, not soldiers. The warning bells started ringing at exactly 10:47 ship time. "Captain," the young officer at the scanner station turned pale. "Something big is coming out of hyperspace." Dong Ho moved to the main screen. Space itself seemed to tear open like cloth. Massive shapes pushed through the rip in reality. Ships, alien ships, the biggest vessels Dong Ho had ever seen. Each alien ship was the size of a small city. Dark metal hulls stretched for miles, covered in weapons that glowed with deadly energy. Strange symbols marked their sides. These were not peaceful explorers like humans. These were warships built for conquest. "How many?" Dong Ho asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 47 ships, sir, maybe more still coming through." The alien fleet arranged itself in perfect battle formation. They moved with the smooth coordination of a military force that had done this many times before. Dong Ho realized with growing fear that humanity was not the first species these aliens had found. A message came through the communication system. The voice was cold and mechanical, translated by computers into human language. "Primitive species. You will surrender your worlds and submit to the Vorthak Empire. You have 72 of your time units to comply. Resistance will result in complete extermination." The transmission ended. No negotiation, no explanation. Just a simple demand for surrender or death. Dong Ho immediately sent an emergency message to Admiral Hai Jin at Luna Station. She was the highest-ranking military officer in human space, responsible for protecting all 12 colony worlds. The message would take 6 hours to reach her, but she needed to know what was coming. On Luna Station, Admiral Hai Jin was reviewing supply reports when the priority message arrived. She had been a soldier for 30 years, fighting pirates and rebels. But nothing had prepared her for this. The alien ships in Dong Ho's recordings were beyond anything humans could build. Their smallest vessels were larger than humanity's biggest warships. The weapons they carried could probably destroy entire cities with a single shot. Jin called an emergency meeting of the Human Defense Council. President Min Ho joined by video link from Earth, along with military commanders from all 12 colonies. The room fell silent as they watched the alien fleet on the main screen. "Options?" Hai Jin asked. General Wu Jin from Mars Colony spoke first. "We have 300 ships total. Most are cargo vessels or small patrol boats. Against a fleet like this, we might as well throw rocks." Dr. So Young, Earth's top expert on alien life, studied the recordings carefully. "These beings call themselves the Vorthak Empire. That suggests they control multiple species. They have done this before, many times." President Min Ho looked older than his 60 years. The weight of humanity's survival rested on his shoulders. "What do we know about their capabilities?" "Their ships are approximately 15 kilometers long," Dr. So Young continued. "The energy readings suggest weapons far beyond our technology. They can tear holes in space for faster-than-light travel. Most importantly, they give ultimatums, not negotiations. This is how they conquer worlds." The room was quiet for a long moment. Everyone understood what this meant. Humanity faced an enemy that had probably destroyed dozens of other species. The aliens had the numbers, the technology, and the experience to wipe out human civilization in a matter of days. "Sir," Admiral Hai Jin said to the president, "I need to ask the hard question. Do we fight or surrender?" President Min Ho looked at each face on the screen. These were humanity's best and brightest, the people who had guided the species to the stars. Now they faced their greatest test. "If we surrender, what happens to us?" he asked Dr. So Young. She shook her head. Based on their communication style and ship designs, the Vorthak Empire appears to be a purely military organization. They probably use conquered species as slaves or soldiers. Surrender means the end of human freedom forever. And if we fight, General? Wu Jin answered honestly. We lose, but we go down fighting. The debate continued for hours. Some argued for negotiation, hoping to find a peaceful solution. Others wanted to scatter the human fleet and hide, maybe preserve some small colonies in distant systems. A few suggested immediate surrender to save as many lives as possible. President Minho listened to every opinion. He thought about the children playing in Earth's parks, the farmers growing food on New Terra, the miners digging tunnels on Asteroid Station 7. All of them depending on this decision. Finally, he stood up. The room fell silent. 70 years ago, my grandfather fought in the last war on Earth. He told me something I never forgot. He said that some things are worth dying for, because without them, you are already dead inside. Minho looked directly into the camera that would broadcast his words to every human world. Freedom is one of those things. The right to choose our own path among the stars, the right to raise our children as we see fit, the right to be human. He paused, knowing that his next words would seal humanity's fate. We will not surrender. We will not kneel. We are human, and we endure. The message went out to all 12 colonies within hours. On every world, humans received the same transmission. Their president's face appeared on screens in homes, schools, and workplaces. My fellow humans, Minho began, we face a terrible choice today. An alien empire has come to our space with demands for surrender. They threaten to destroy us if we refuse. He explained the situation simply and honestly. The alien fleet was too powerful to defeat in normal battle. Surrender meant slavery. Fighting meant probable death. But we are not normal, Minho continued. We are the species that survived ice ages and plagues. We are the people who built cities on dead worlds and made gardens in space. We are humans, and we do not give up. Across human space, the response was immediate and unanimous. Colony governors pledged their support. Military units prepared for battle. Civilian volunteers flooded recruitment centers. On the Sejong's Dream, Captain Dong Ho watched the alien fleet with new eyes. They were still impossible to defeat. But they were no longer facing weak humans who would run away. They were facing a species that had chosen to fight. The 72-hour deadline approached. Vorthak War Marshal Thexvar studied the human response with growing confusion. In their 1,000-year history, the Empire had conquered 47 different species. All had eventually surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. These humans were different. Their ships were moving into defensive positions. Their communications showed no signs of panic or negotiation attempts. They were actually preparing to fight a battle they could not win. Thexvar checked the tactical computers again. Human technology was centuries behind Vorthak weapons. Their largest ships were tiny compared to Empire dreadnoughts. The mathematical probability of human victory was 0.003%. Yet something bothered the war marshal. In all their conquests, the Vorthak had never faced a species quite like this. Most civilizations were hive minds or rigid social hierarchies. They surrendered when their leaders were threatened. Humans seemed to make individual decisions. Every ship, every colony, every person was choosing to fight separately. There was no central mind to break, no royal family to capture. It was like trying to defeat an entire galaxy of separate warriors. But numbers were numbers. Technology was technology. The Empire would crush these humans like all the others. As the deadline expired, War Marshal Thexvar gave the order to begin the attack. The Vorthak Empire had never failed to conquer a species. These pink-skinned primitives would not be the first. He had no idea that he was about to make the biggest mistake in galactic history. The attack began at dawn over Proxima Colony. 47 Vorthak warships dropped out of hyperspace like falling mountains, their weapons charged with energy that made the local star look dim. War Marshal Thexvar expected the battle to last, maybe 2 hours. Commander Jinwoo commanded the human defense fleet around Proxima. He had 12 ships against 47. Each enemy vessel was 10 times larger than his biggest cruiser. Any sane military commander would have retreated immediately. Jinwoo was not sane. He was human. All ships, attack formation Gamma, He ordered over the communications system. "Remember what we are fighting for." The human ships moved forward, small, fast vessels darting between the massive Vorthak dreadnoughts like fish swimming around whales. They fired everything they had: missiles, lasers, particle beams, even solid metal slugs shot at incredible speed. The alien shields absorbed most of the damage, but some shots got through. Human weapons were weak individually, but 12 ships firing together could hurt even a Vorthak giant. Thexvar watched from his command ship with growing irritation. These humans should have run away by now. Instead, they kept attacking, kept fighting, even as their ships were destroyed one by one. The human cruiser Soul's Pride took a direct hit from a plasma cannon. Its hull cracked open, atmosphere bleeding, into space. But instead of retreating, the damaged ship accelerated toward the nearest Vorthak vessel. "Jinwu to all ships," the commander's voice crackled over the radio. "My engines are gone. I'm going to ram the command ship. Make it count." The Soul's Pride struck the Vorthak flagship at full speed. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire. That could be seen from the planet's surface. War Marshal Thexvar found himself on the bridge of his second command vessel, staring at the wreckage in disbelief. No conquered species had ever destroyed a Vorthak command ship. The Empire had been fighting for 1,000 years without losing a single flagship. These humans had done it in the first hour of battle, but the worst was yet to come. On Terra Station, Engineer Naon worked frantically in the reactor core. Vorthak boarding parties had broken through the outer hull. Alien soldiers were advancing through the corridors, killing anyone they found. Naun could hear the fighting getting closer. Heavy footsteps, energy weapons firing, human voices shouting in pain and anger. She knew the station was lost, but she also knew what she could do about it. Terra Station was built around a massive fusion reactor that powered the entire colony. If that reactor went critical, it would explode with the force of a small star. The explosion would destroy the station, the colony, and anything within 1,000,000 kilometers, including the 3 Vorthak cruisers that were currently docked to the station. Naon's hands moved over the control panels with calm precision. She had trained for this scenario, though she never thought she would actually do it. Override the safety systems, disable the automatic shutdown, remove the control rods all at once. The reactor began to overheat immediately. Alarms blared throughout the station. The few remaining humans tried to reach the escape pods, but there was not enough time. Naun sat back in her chair and thought about her daughter on Earth. Little Hai Young was only 5 years old. She would grow up without a mother, but at least she would grow up free. The explosion lit up the entire star system. Terra Station vanished in a flash of nuclear fire. The 3 Vorthak cruisers disappeared with it, along with 2,000 alien soldiers. War Marshal Thexvar stared at the tactical display in horror. In one day of fighting, the Empire had lost 4 major warships. That was more than they had lost in the previous century of conquest. The Battle of Proxima continued for 6 more hours. Human ships fought until they were completely destroyed. Human soldiers never surrendered, even when surrounded and outnumbered. Human civilians chose death over capture. When the fighting finally ended, 12 human worlds had fallen to the Vorthak Empire. But the cost had been terrible. The aliens had lost 17 ships and over 50,000 soldiers. Their casualty. Reports showed something that had never happened before in Empire history. The humans had made them bleed. On Earth, scientist Tae-hyun worked through the night examining wreckage from crashed Vorthak fighters. Pieces of alien metal and technology covered his laboratory. He needed to understand how their weapons worked, how their ships flew, how their soldiers thought. What he discovered changed everything. Vorthak technology was not purely mechanical like human machines. It was biological. Living metal that could heal itself. Computers made from brain tissue. Weapons that were grown rather than built. This explains their power, Tae-hyun told Admiral Hae-jin over a secure communication link. They don't just conquer species. They absorb them. They use the conquered peoples as living components in their technology. Hae-jin felt sick. You mean their ships are powered by slaves? Worse than slaves. The biological components are probably not even aware anymore. They have been turned into living machines. This revelation spread quickly through human command. The Vorthak Empire was not just evil. It was obscene. They turned intelligent beings into spare parts for their war machine. But the biological nature of their technology also suggested a weakness. Living systems could be poisoned, infected, or disrupted in ways that pure machines could not. Military strategist Yun Su spent 3 days without sleep, developing new battle plans. Traditional space combat would never work against the empires. Superior numbers and firepower, but unconventional tactics might give humanity a chance. We need to think like viruses, she explained to the Defense Council. Small, fast, unpredictable. We hit them where they don't expect, retreat before they can respond, then hit them somewhere else. Her plan was radical. Instead of big fleet, battles. Humans would use small groups of ships to attack supply lines, communication relays, and isolated outposts. They would avoid direct confrontation whenever possible. Most importantly, they would target the biological components of Vorthak technology, poison their living systems, disrupt their organic computers, turn their greatest strength into a weakness. The plan had one major problem. It required humanity to abandon all their colonies and live on ships, hiding in empty space while they fought their guerrilla war. Billions of humans would become refugees overnight. President Minho made the decision without hesitation. Better to be homeless and free than comfortable slaves. Give the evacuation order. Across human space, the greatest migration in history began. Entire cities packed their belongings onto cargo ships. Farmers loaded their animals and seed banks. Scientists grabbed their most important research. Children said goodbye to the only homes they had ever known. The Vorthak expected to find rich worlds full of slaves and resources. Instead, they found empty cities and abandoned factories. The humans had taken everything useful and disappeared into the dark between the stars. War Marshal Thexvar studied the reports with growing frustration. Conquering empty worlds was pointless. The Empire needed slaves to operate its technology and resources to fuel its war machine. These humans had denied them both. Worse, small human ships were already attacking Vorthak supply convoys. The aliens had expected grateful surrenders and cooperative slaves. Instead, they faced an enemy that refused to be conquered and seemed to grow more dangerous with each passing day. For the first time in 1,000 years, a Vorthak war marshal began to wonder if the Empire might actually lose a war. The Battle of Proxima was over. Humanity had been defeated in traditional military terms, but they had also proven something important to themselves and their enemies. They could make the mighty Vorthak Empire bleed, and if the Empire could bleed, it could die. 2 years had passed since the first Vorthak attack. The war had spread across dozens of star systems, but it looked nothing like the Empire's previous conquests. Instead of quick victories and new slave worlds, the aliens faced something they had never encountered before, an enemy that refused to stay defeated. Guerrilla Commander Do Hyun crouched in the ruins of what used to be a Vorthak supply depot. His team of 20 fighters had hit the base 3 hours ago, destroyed the ammunition stores, and escaped before reinforcements arrived. It was their 4th successful raid this month. Do Hyun's fighters were not professional soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, engineers, and shop owners who had learned to fight because their homes were gone. They wore mismatched armor taken from dead aliens. They carried weapons built from scavenged Vorthak technology and human engineering. Target acquired, whispered Sora, his best scout. She pointed toward a convoy of alien transport ships moving through the asteroid field. 6 vessels, minimal escort. Looks like medical supplies. Do Hyun smiled grimly. Medical supplies were perfect targets. The biological components in Vorthak technology required constant care and feeding. Disrupting their medical logistics caused problems throughout their entire fleet. The attack was swift and brutal. Human fighters emerged from behind asteroids like wolves attacking a flock of sheep. They destroyed the escort ships first, then boarded the transports to capture anything useful. But this raid was different. When Do Hyun's team broke into the lead transport, they found something unexpected. The ship was not full of medical supplies. It was full of prisoners. Dozens of alien beings sat chained in the cargo hold. But these were not humans. They belonged to species Do Hyun had never seen before. Some looked like giant insects, others resembled walking plants. A few were so strange he could not even guess what they were. "Who are you?" Do-hyun asked in broken Vorthak, one of the few alien languages humans had learned to speak. An insect-like creature with 4 arms answered. Its voice was translated by a collar around its neck. "We are Keth Tar. We served the Empire for 300 years. But we saw what you humans did at Proxima. We remembered what freedom felt like." Do-hyun realized. What had happened? These were not prisoners, they were rebels! Members of conquered species who had risen up against their Vorthak masters after seeing humanity's example. The war had become something bigger than human survival. It was now a galactic rebellion. On New Sol Colony, Governor Young-mi faced her own impossible choice. Vorthak ground forces had surrounded the city. 200,000 aliens with energy weapons and battle armor against 30,000 human civilians with hunting rifles and farming tools. The smart thing to do was surrender, save lives, accept defeat gracefully. Young Mai was not feeling smart. She was feeling angry. "Citizens of New Sol," she announced over the colony's communication system. "The enemy has given us 1 hour to surrender. They promised to treat us well if we cooperate." She paused, looking out at the alien army gathering on the plains outside the city. "I have a counteroffer. Every building in this city is wired with explosives. Every tunnel and bunker contains enough firepower to level a city block. If they want New Sol, they can have it, but they will pay for every meter with their blood." The evacuation had begun weeks ago. Most civilians were already gone, hidden in underground shelters outside the city. The people who remained were volunteers, who had chosen to make their final stand here. When Vorthak forces entered New Sol, they found empty streets and silent buildings. It seemed like the humans had fled after all. The alien commander ordered his troops to secure the government buildings and industrial centers. The first explosion took out an entire battalion. Hidden charges detonated under the main street, creating a crater 50 meters wide. Alien soldiers scrambled for cover as more explosions erupted throughout the city. Every building was a trap. Every tunnel was a weapon. The humans had turned their own city into a giant bomb designed to kill as many invaders as possible. Governor Young-mi watched from her command bunker as alien reinforcements poured into the deadly maze. She waited until the maximum number of enemies were inside the city limits. Then she pressed the final button. New Sol disappeared in a mushroom cloud that could be seen from orbit. The explosion killed every Vorthak soldier in the city and most of their support units outside the blast zone. It also killed Young-mi and the 300 volunteers who had stayed behind to trigger the charges, but their sacrifice was not wasted. The destruction of an entire Vorthak army sent shockwaves throughout the Empire. Conquered species on 100 worlds saw the news and began to wonder if freedom was possible after all. Dr. So Young worked in a hidden laboratory aboard the research ship, Invisible Truth. Her team had spent months studying captured Vorthak technology and biology. What they discovered was both horrifying and hopeful. The Vorthak Empire was not really one species controlling many others. It was more like a disease. The creatures called Vorthak were parasites that infected other beings and took control of their bodies and minds. "Look at this," So Young told her assistant, pointing to a microscopic image on the screen. "The Vorthak organism attaches to the host's nervous system. It can control thoughts, emotions, even basic motor functions." Her assistant, Dr. Hyun Woo, stared at the image in disgust. "So every Vorthak soldier is actually a mind-controlled slave?" "Exactly. And if we can find a way to kill the parasite without harming the host." They worked day and night, testing different chemicals and biological agents. Most attempts failed. The parasites were incredibly resilient, and anything powerful enough to kill them also killed the host. But after months of research, they found the answer. A specific virus that attacked only the Vorthak parasites while leaving other biological systems alone. The virus could be delivered through air, water, or direct injection. The first test was conducted on captured Vorthak soldiers. The results were immediate and dramatic. The alien warriors collapsed as the parasites died. When they woke up, they spoke in different languages and begged to be released. They were not Vorthak at all. They were members of conquered species who had been enslaved for decades or centuries. With the parasites dead, their original personalities returned. Resistance fighter Ho Jin was the first to use the new biological weapon in combat. His team infiltrated a Vorthak base and released the virus into the air circulation system. Within hours, half the alien garrison had turned against their commanders. The sight of Vorthak soldiers fighting each other spread panic throughout the Empire's forces. They could no longer trust their own troops. Any soldier might suddenly remember his true identity and turn rebel, but the Empire's response was typically brutal. When biological weapons freed slaves on the industrial world of Kepler-7, Vorthak commanders ordered the planet's destruction. Orbital bombardment turned the entire world into radioactive glass, killing millions of newly liberated beings along with human refugees. Similar atrocities occurred across the galaxy. The Empire would rather destroy everything than lose control. Entire star systems were rendered uninhabitable to prevent rebellion. The refugee crisis became enormous. Billions of beings fled from Vorthak-controlled space, looking for sanctuary among human colonies. Ships designed to carry hundreds now held thousands. Food and medical supplies ran short. Disease spread through overcrowded shelters. Captain Dong Ho commanded one of the largest refugee fleets, protecting a convoy of 2 million beings from 17 different species. His job was to find them safe homes while avoiding Vorthak patrols. "Captain," reported his communications officer, "we are receiving a transmission from the Telhari refugee ship. They are offering to share their energy shield technology with our defense fleet." Dong Ho smiled. This was becoming common. Liberated species were not just passengers on human ships. They were becoming allies, contributing their unique abilities to the growing rebellion. The Telhari were crystalline beings who could generate powerful energy fields. The aquatic Neph had developed biological computers more advanced than human electronics. The machine intelligences called constructs could process information faster than any organic brain. Working together, the refugee species and humans began to develop new technologies that neither side could have created alone. Hybrid ships with living hulls and mechanical weapons, computers that could think like humans but calculate like machines, communication systems that worked across vast distances in real time. The Vorthak Empire still had superior numbers and firepower, but the rebels were becoming more advanced every day. More importantly, they were fighting for something the Empire could never understand. They were fighting for the right to be themselves. War Marshal Thexvar stood before the Supreme Command Council on the Vorthak homeworld. His report was not what the Empire's leaders wanted to hear. "The human rebellion has spread to 43 star systems," he said. 17 conquered species have joined their cause. Our casualties are approaching 2 million soldiers and 3,000 ships. The Supreme Commander, an ancient being whose host body was barely recognizable under layers of parasitic growth, spoke in a voice like grinding metal. "Unacceptable. We have ruled this galaxy for 1,000 years. No primitive species will end our dominion." "With respect, Supreme Commander, 5 years of war had changed everything. The Vorthak Empire, once the undisputed master of the galaxy, now faced rebellions on 300 worlds. Their iron grip on conquered species loosened with each passing day as liberation movements spread like wildfire through space. Admiral Hai Jin stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Indomitable, watching the largest fleet in galactic history prepare for battle. Ships from 37 liberated species floated in perfect formation around her vessel. Sleek Telhari cruisers with crystal hulls, living Neph vessels that looked more grown than built, massive construct dreadnoughts bristling with weapons that calculated their own targeting, and at the center of it all, human ships. Small, tough, stubborn vessels crewed by the species that had started this rebellion. They were still outnumbered by their alien allies, but they remained the heart of the liberation movement. "Final target confirmed," reported Communications Officer Sung Min. "Zerion Prime, the Vorthak homeworld." Hyojin nodded. After 5 years of hit-and-run attacks, they were finally strong enough to strike at the Empire's heart. The heavily fortified system had never fallen to enemy attack in 1,000 years of conquest. Today, that would change. The assault fleet included 12,000 warships and support vessels. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, but Zerion Prime was defended by the Empire's most powerful fleets and deadliest weapons. The battle would decide the fate of the galaxy. Engineer Jun Ho worked frantically in the communication center of Luna Station. His sister Na Yun had died at Terra Station years ago, but her sacrifice had inspired him to develop humanity's greatest technological breakthrough. Quantum entanglement communicators allowed instant communication across any distance. No more delays waiting for messages to travel between star systems. Fleet commanders could coordinate in real time, sharing information and tactics as fast as they could think. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayajin." Her voice crackled through the quantum network. "Operation Liberation begins now. Remember what we are fighting for." The fleet jumped to hyperspace in perfect synchronization. 12,000 ships vanishing from normal space like ghosts, reappearing moments later in the Xerion system. Vorthak defenders were waiting for them. The Battle of Xerion Prime began with the most intense space combat in galactic history. Massive dreadnoughts exchanged fire at point-blank range. Energy beams that could vaporize mountains carved through space. Missiles with planet-killing warheads streaked between the fleets like deadly fireworks. The Vorthak had prepared for this attack for months. Hidden weapon platforms emerged from asteroid fields. Automated defense stations opened fire from moon bases. The system's outer planets launched clouds of explosive drones. But the Liberation Fleet had advantages the Empire had never faced before. Real-time coordination allowed them to respond to threats instantly. Combined technologies from dozens of species created weapons and defenses beyond anything the Vorthak had encountered. Most importantly, they were fighting for freedom while the Empire fought only for conquest. Captain Dong Ho commanded a mixed squadron of human and alien ships in the battle's fiercest fighting. His formation included 12 different species working together as one unit. When Telhari shields failed, human engineers repaired them. When human weapons overheated, construct computers provided targeting data. Enemy dreadnought bearing 27 Mark 6 reported his tactical officer, a six-armed Keth Tar named Click Whistle Buzz, the closest human translation of its actual name. "All ships, concentrate fire," Dong Ho ordered. 20 vessels from 7 species focused their weapons on the massive Vorthak warship. The alien vessel's shields collapsed under the combined assault, but the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Tae-hyun had spent years studying captured Vorthak technology. His latest discovery was devastating, a way to permanently sever the connection between parasites and their hosts without killing either organism. The Liberation Ray, as soldiers called it, could free entire ships full of enslaved beings in minutes. When fired at Vorthak vessels, the weapons turned enemy fleets into instant allies. "Liberation Ray charged and ready," reported Weapons Officer Kyung-ai on the research ship New Hope. "Fire," ordered Captain Min Seo. The beam struck a Vorthak cruiser, amidships. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the alien ship's weapons stopped firing. Its engines shut down. Emergency lights flickered on across its hull. Minutes later, a transmission came from the cruiser. The voice spoke in a language human computers had never heard before. "This is ship singer Coral Grove Dancing of the Aquatic Republic. We remember who we are. We remember what was stolen from us. We join the fight for freedom." The Nef crew of the captured vessel turned their ship around and began attacking their former masters. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as Liberation Rays freed thousands of enslaved soldiers. The tide of battle turned rapidly in favor of the rebels. Vorthak ships found themselves fighting their own converted vessels. Command and control broke down as officers could no longer trust their subordinates. War Marshal Thexvar watched the disaster unfold from his command bunker deep inside Xerion Prime. The planet's surface was already under bombardment from rebel ships. Explosions lit up the sky like deadly fireworks. "Sir, we are receiving surrender requests from 40% of our fleet," reported a communications officer. "Denied. Order all ships to fight to the death." But it was too late. The Vorthak Empire's greatest weakness had finally been exposed. Their entire military structure depended on enslaved species who had never forgotten their desire for freedom. When those slaves remembered who they truly were, the Empire collapsed like a house of cards. The battle raged for 6 months as rebel, Forces fought their way through layer after layer of planetary defenses. Every Vorthak position was a fortress that had to be taken by storm. Every city was a battleground where freedom fighters faced desperate defenders, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Empire was fighting a war it could not win against, an enemy it did not understand. Deep in the capital city of Zerion Prime, the final confrontation took place in the throne room of the Supreme Command. Captain Dong-ho led a squad of liberation fighters through corridors lined with the preserved bodies of conquered species. They found War Marshal Thexvar waiting for them, armed with the Empire's most advanced weapons and surrounded by his personal guard of pure-blood Vorthak warriors. "You cannot defeat us," Thexvar snarled in his mechanical voice. "We have ruled this galaxy for 1,000 years. We are perfect. We are eternal." Dong-ho raised his liberation ray and smiled sadly. "That's your problem. You never learned the most important lesson in the universe." "What lesson?" "Nothing lasts forever, especially empires built on slavery and fear. The final battle was brief but vicious. Thexvar was stronger and faster than any human, his body enhanced by 1,000 years of genetic manipulation. But Dong-ho had something the alien could never understand, the absolute certainty that freedom was worth any sacrifice. When it was over, War Marshal Thexvar lay dying on the floor of his own throne room. His mechanical voice was barely a whisper. "Impossible. We were perfect. We were eternal." "No," Dong-ho said quietly. "You were just bullies with big ships. And eventually every bully meets someone who fights back." The death of the last War Marshal marked the end of the Vorthak Empire. Across the galaxy, garrison commanders surrendered or fled as their enslaved troops turned against them. Liberation fleets moved from system to system, freeing billions of beings who had lived in bondage for generations. The rebellion that had started with humanity's refusal to surrender had become the greatest liberation in galactic history. But victory came with a terrible price. Entire star systems lay in ruins. Billions of beings had died in the fighting. The galaxy's economy was shattered, its political systems destroyed. The rebels had won their freedom. Now, they had to figure out what to do with it. Admiral He-jin stood in the ruins of the Vorthak throne room, looking out at a galaxy finally free from tyranny. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Building a free galaxy would be harder than destroying an empire. But for the first time in 1,000 years, every species in the galaxy would have the chance to choose their own destiny. And that, He-jin thought, was worth fighting for. The war was over, but the galaxy was broken. President Minho stood in his office on Earth, looking at reports that would have been impossible to imagine just 6 years ago. The Vorthak Empire was gone, destroyed by the combined forces of humanity, and 47 liberated species. Freedom had won, but freedom was expensive. The numbers were staggering. Over 400 billion beings dead, 3,000 star systems damaged or destroyed, entire species reduced to refugee populations scattered across space. The galactic economy had collapsed completely, leaving billions unemployed and homeless. Minho looked older than his 70 years. The war had aged him in ways that time alone could not explain. Leading humanity through its greatest trial had cost him everything except the satisfaction of knowing they had done the right thing. "Sir," said his aide, Secretary Park, "the representatives are ready for you." Minho nodded and walked to the conference room where delegates from liberated species waited. These beings had once been slaves of the Empire. Now they were free, but freedom brought responsibilities that many were not prepared to handle. The meeting room was a marvel of diplomatic engineering. Environmental systems maintained different atmospheres for each species. Translation computers worked overtime to convert dozens of languages into understandable speech. Representatives floated, crawled, and walked on surfaces designed for their unique biological needs. "Friends," Minho began, his words translated instantly into 47 languages. "We have gathered to create something that has never existed before. A galactic government based on cooperation rather than conquest." The response was immediate chaos. Some species wanted immediate revenge against all former Vorthak hosts, regardless of their involuntary enslavement. Others demanded territorial compensation for centuries of oppression. A few argued for complete isolation, wanting nothing to do with galactic politics ever again. The Kethtar representative, Click Whistle Buzz, spoke for many when he said, "How can we trust any central authority? The Empire promised order and delivered only death. Why should a human-led government be different?" Minho had expected this question. It was the same doubt that kept him awake at night. "Because," he said slowly, "we do not want to rule you. We want to work with you." The Galactic Liberation Council will have representatives from every species, with decisions made by majority vote. No single people will control the others. The Telhari delegate, a crystalline being whose thoughts created visible light patterns, flashed a sequence of skeptical colors. And if the majority decides to oppress the minority, democracy can become tyranny of the mob. Dr. So Young, now serving as Earth's chief diplomat, answered that concern. "We have learned from Earth's history. The Council will have a charter of universal rights that cannot be changed by majority vote. Every being has the right to life, freedom, and self-determination. No government can take those away." The debates continued for months. Every detail had to be negotiated between species with completely different concepts of law, ethics, and social organization. Some aliens thought in hive minds where individual rights made no sense. Others were solitary hunters who could barely cooperate with their own kind. But slowly, painfully, a new government took shape. The Galactic Liberation Council would coordinate defense, trade, and diplomacy between member worlds. Local systems would govern themselves according to their own traditions, as long as they respected the Universal Rights Charter. Commander Young Mi had survived the destruction of New Sol, though barely. Now she led the humanitarian relief efforts, coordinating aid shipments to devastated worlds across the galaxy. The scale of suffering was beyond imagination. On the former slave world of Kappa Centauri, billions of liberated beings had no skills except operating Vorthak machinery. They could not grow food, build shelters, or even communicate with each other because the Empire had deliberately kept them isolated. "We need teachers," Young Mi reported to the Emergency Relief Committee, "engineers to rebuild infrastructure, doctors to treat trauma victims, counselors to help beings remember how to be free." Human colonies responded with typical generosity. Despite their own losses, they sent supply ships loaded with food, medicine, and volunteers. Former refugees became aid workers, sharing their knowledge with newly liberated worlds. But some problems could not be solved with good intentions and hard work. The Zerion massacre was the worst example. A group of Kethtar freedom fighters had discovered that most of the population on their former homeworld consisted of other species wearing Kethtar host bodies controlled by Vorthak parasites for centuries. When the parasites died, the hosts retained their Kethtar appearance, but remembered their original identities. They were not the original Kethtar people at all. They were strangers wearing the faces of the dead. The surviving pure-blood Kethtar could not accept this. In their rage and grief, they murdered over 50 million innocent beings who had the misfortune to look like their lost relatives. "We must intervene," argued Admiral Haya-Jin during an emergency council session. "Genocide is genocide, regardless of the motivation." But intervention meant war against a species humanity had fought to liberate. Many council members argued that forcing peace on unwilling peoples was exactly what the Vorthak Empire had done. The compromise was painful, but necessary. The mixed identity beings were evacuated to new worlds, far from their angry former neighbors. The pure-blood Kethtar were left alone on their homeworld, isolated and bitter. It was not justice, but it prevented further bloodshed. Dr. So Young established the Institute for Galactic Reconciliation on a neutral space station orbiting a dead star. Her mission was to help former Vorthak hosts overcome their psychological conditioning and find new identities in a free galaxy. The work was heartbreaking. Many beings had been enslaved for so long that they could not function without constant orders. They sat in their quarters waiting for commands that would never come. Some committed suicide rather than face the responsibility of making their own decisions. But others thrived in freedom. Former slave soldiers became artists, creating beautiful works that expressed their joy at being alive. Scientists who had been forced to build weapons, instead developed medical treatments and agricultural improvements. The most surprising patients were the pure-blood Vorthak themselves. Without the Empire's military structure to support them, they were revealed as weak, dependent beings who had never learned to survive on their own. "They are not evil," So Young explained to her staff. "They are victims of their own system. The Empire turned them into parasites who could only exist by controlling others." Some former Vorthak chose to integrate with their host bodies permanently, creating new hybrid beings. Others underwent surgical separation and tried to build independent lives. A few simply could not adapt and died of despair. The economic transformation proved even more challenging than the political one. The Empire's economy had been based entirely on slave labor and tribute from conquered worlds. With slavery abolished and the tribute system ended, entire industries collapsed overnight. Human economist Jin Su worked with alien counterparts to develop new trade networks based on voluntary exchange. The transition was chaotic and often unfair, but it was better than the alternative. "Freedom is messy," he told a gathering of business leaders from 12 species. "Democratic capitalism is inefficient compared to slave labor, but it is also the only system that allows everyone to benefit from economic growth." New industries emerged from the chaos. Liberated worlds that had specialized in growing food for Vorthak armies now exported their products to refugee camps. Species with advanced technology shared their knowledge in exchange for raw materials and cultural goods. The Crystal Gardens of Telhari became a popular tourist destination for beings who had never seen art created purely for beauty rather than propaganda. Nef underwater cities offered healing treatments that combined their biological expertise with human medical knowledge. Slowly, tentatively, the galaxy began to heal. Military officer Sang Ho led the Demilitarization Commission, tasked with converting the Empire's massive war machine into tools for reconstruction. It was dangerous work. Many Vorthak weapons were booby-trapped to prevent capture, but the rewards were enormous. A single Vorthak dreadnought contained enough metal to build a dozen hospitals. Their plasma cannons could be converted into fusion reactors that powered entire cities. Weapons factories became manufacturing centers for farming equipment and medical supplies. The symbolic value was as important as the practical benefits. Seeing instruments of oppression transformed into tools of freedom gave hope to beings who had lived in fear for generations. As the first anniversary of victory approached, President Min Ho reflected on humanity's journey from a small species struggling to defend 12 worlds to the founders of galactic civilization's greatest experiment in freedom. The cost had been terrible. Every human family had lost someone in the war. Earth itself bore the scars of Vorthak bombing raids. The optimistic future that humans had dreamed of among the stars had been replaced by the harsh reality of galactic politics and endless crises. But they had also accomplished something impossible. They had proven that freedom was stronger than tyranny, that cooperation could triumph over conquest, and that even the smallest specie. 100 years had passed since the fall of the Vorthak Empire. The galaxy had transformed beyond recognition, shaped by the revolution that began when humanity refused to surrender to impossible odds. Chancellor Miran stood at the podium, in New Geneva's Grand Assembly Hall, looking out at representatives from over 300 species. Today marked the centennial of Liberation Day, and beings from across the galaxy had come to remember the war that changed everything. Miran was the great-granddaughter of Commander Jin Wu, the hero who had sacrificed his ship to destroy the first Vorthak flagship. She carried his courage in her blood and his determination in her heart. Leading the Galactic Liberation Council was the greatest honor of her life. 100 years ago, she began, her words translated into hundreds of languages. Our ancestors faced a choice between freedom and slavery. They chose freedom, even though it meant certain death. The audience listened in respectful silence. Every species represented in the hall had been touched by the Liberation War. Some had fought alongside humanity from the beginning. Others had been freed from Vorthak control during the fighting. A few were descendants of the Empire's former masters, now living as equal citizens in the galaxy they had once ruled. Today, we honor not just the victory, but the price that was paid for it, Miran continued. We remember the billions who died so that we could live free. The memorial ceremony lasted for hours. Each liberated species shared stories of their suffering under the Empire and their gratitude for humanity's sacrifice. The Telhari sang crystal songs that made the air itself shine with remembered pain and joy. The Kethtar performed their traditional dance of mourning and celebration. The aquatic Neph created living paintings in pools of water that showed the war's turning points. But the most moving moment came when the former Vorthak delegate, a being called Two Who Were One, spoke for the species that had once enslaved the galaxy. We cannot undo the evil we committed, the hybrid creature said, in a voice that combined two different beings merged into one body. We can only dedicate our lives to ensuring it never happens again. We thank humanity for showing us that freedom is possible even for monsters like us. After the ceremony, Miran walked through the memorial gardens that surrounded the assembly hall. Millions of names were carved into black stone walls that stretched for miles. Humans and aliens, soldiers and civilians, heroes and ordinary people, who had done extraordinary things. She stopped at a familiar section, running her fingers over names she had known since childhood. Captain Dong Ho, Engineer Na Yun, War Leader Do Hyun, Governor Young Mi, all the humans who had started the rebellion that freed the galaxy. But other names were there too. Click Whistle Buzz, the Kethtar who had helped humanity understand alien technology. Coral Grove Dancing, the Neph who had turned his ship against the Empire. Crystal Song of Freedom, the Telhari who had died defending human refugees. The memorial reminded everyone that liberation had been a shared struggle, not a human victory alone. Historian Kyung Soo had spent decades documenting the war's true cost. His research revealed the staggering scope of Vorthak atrocities. Over 400 billion sentient beings killed during their millennium of conquest, entire species driven to extinction, countless worlds rendered uninhabitable. The Empire was not just evil, he told students at the University of Liberated Worlds. It was a cancer that consumed everything it touched. If humanity had not stopped them, they would have eventually devoured the entire galaxy. His latest book, The Price of Freedom, had become required reading throughout the galactic education system. It told the complete story of the Liberation War, from humanity's first contact with the Vorthak to the establishment of the current democratic government. But Kyung-Soo's work also revealed uncomfortable truths about the war's aftermath. Some liberated species had proven incapable of self-government after generations of slavery. Others had collapsed into civil wars once the Empire's control was removed. A few worlds had voluntarily returned to authoritarian rule because their people could not handle the responsibility of freedom. Democracy is not natural, Kyung-Soo explained to his students. It must be learned, practiced, and defended every day. The Vorthak Empire lasted 1,000 years because most beings prefer security to liberty. Humanity's greatest achievement was not military victory. It was teaching the galaxy that freedom is worth the struggle. The galaxy's transformation seemed miraculous to those who remembered the old days. Former slave worlds now hosted thriving democracies. Technology sharing between species had accelerated scientific advancement by centuries. Art, music, and literature flourished as diverse cultures exchanged ideas freely for the first time in galactic history. The Crystal Gardens of Telhari had become the galaxy's cultural center, where artists from hundreds of species created works that combined their unique perspectives. The underwater cities of Neph served as universities where beings learned to think in ways their species had never imagined. Human worlds became melting pots where refugees from across the galaxy built new lives alongside their liberators. Trade flowed freely between star systems that had once been isolated by imperial decree. The Construct Collective shared their computational technology in exchange for biological research from organic species. Former mining worlds became manufacturing, centers that produced goods for peaceful purposes rather than war. But beneath the prosperity, serious challenges remained. Deep space exploration had revealed evidence of other galactic empires beyond the former Vorthak territory. Some showed signs of expansionist ambitions that worried military planners. Others maintained strict isolation policies that made peaceful contact nearly impossible. Xenopsychologist So Jin studied the ongoing effects of the Liberation War on different species development. Her research helped guide rehabilitation efforts on worlds still recovering from centuries of oppression. Trauma echoes through generations, she explained to the Council's Health Committee. The children of former slaves often struggle with anxiety and depression, even though they were born free. Some species have lost the ability to make decisions for themselves. Others have become so aggressive that they cannot coexist peacefully with neighbors. Her treatment centers worked with thousands of patients across the galaxy, teaching former slaves how to live without masters and former masters how to exist without slaves. The work was slow and often heartbreaking, but it was essential for galactic peace. Some success stories gave hope for the future. The Yereth had been bred by the Vorthak as living computers, their brains enhanced to process mathematical calculations, faster than any machine. After liberation, they had struggled to find purpose in a galaxy that no longer needed living calculators. But working with human artists, they had discovered that their mathematical abilities could create stunning works of abstract beauty. Yereth sculptures and paintings were now treasured throughout the galaxy as examples of how former tools of oppression could become instruments of joy. Fleet Admiral Dong Min, Captain Dong Ho's son, commanded humanity's exploration fleets as they ventured into uncharted regions of space. His mission was protection, not conquest, ensuring that future first contacts did not repeat the Vorthak pattern of invasion and enslavement. We learned the hard way that the galaxy contains both wonders and horrors, he told his officers during a briefing aboard the exploration ship New Horizon. Our job is to find the wonders while avoiding the horrors. His fleets had made peaceful contact with 17 new species in the past decade. Most were primitive civilizations still developing spaceflight technology. A few were advanced societies that had somehow avoided contact with the Vorthak Empire. But 2 encounters had been distinctly hostile. The machine intelligences of the Nexus Cluster viewed all organic life as a disease to be eliminated. The bioweapons of the plague worlds had tried to infect human ships with deadly viruses that would have wiped out entire colonies. Both threats had been contained, but barely. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of beings who might prove as evil as the Vorthak had been. The political challenges were equally complex. The Galactic Liberation Council governed through consensus and compromise, which made quick decisions nearly impossible. Crisis responses that the old empire would have handled in hours now took weeks of debate and negotiation. Some species had grown frustrated with democratic inefficiency and were considering withdrawal from the council. Others wanted stronger central authority to deal with external threats. A few extremist groups actually advocated for a return to imperial rule, claiming that freedom had brought only chaos and weakness. Chancellor Mi Ran spent most of her time mediating disputes between member species. Territorial conflicts, trade disagreements, cultural misunderstandings, the galaxy seemed to have an endless supply of problems that democracy was poorly equipped to solve. But she never forgot what the alternative looked like. The preserved ruins of Vorthak slave camps served as museums where young beings could see what life had been like under imperial rule. The exhibits were horrifying, but necessary reminders of why freedom was worth defending. In the deepest vaults of the Galactic Archives, sealed records contained the complete truth of humanity's war against the Vorthak Empire. Future historians would debate Weoshi,